Hello and welcome to Realpolitik. This is Johny, the Hindu's International Affairs Editor. West Asia, India's extended neighbourhood, remains on the brink. Israel today is fighting a two-front war, one in Gaza and the other in Lebanon. After a year of fighting, its war in Gaza against Hamas remains unfinished, and it launched its fourth invasion of Lebanon on October the 1st, targeting Hezbollah. Beyond these two ground battles, there is an unfolding confrontation between Israel and Iran. Where does this dangerous situation leave West Asia? And what does it mean for India? To discuss the situation in the region, I am today joined by Ambassador Ranjan Mathai, India's former Foreign Secretary, who had also served as India's ambassador to Israel in the 1990s. Welcome to Realpolitik, Ambassador Mathai.
How did we reach here? Because the Israelis would say it is because of Palestinian terror and also because of Iran's support for all these militia groups in the region. The Palestinians would say that they have a right to resist because they live under occupation. The Iranians say that their support for the Palestinian militia groups or their support for different resistance organizations in the region is their responsibility. The Americans would say that Israel has a right to defend itself. So you have different narratives, but what we have now is a region which is on the brink of fire. So how did we reach here?
Well, I think that there's a bit of truth in all these narratives. From the Palestinian point of view, there is a status quo which was sought to be frozen, in which they seemed to be, or they felt, they perceived that they were being locked out of a solution to their long-term problem, which is, or their problem, which is occupation and lack of a state of their own. The Israelis certainly were proceeding with a set of relationships within the region, outside the region, and they were shaken up by the Palestinian attack, which was a terrorist attack. So there's truth in that narrative. For the Iranians, there is a geopolitical, political strategy in which they feel there is a legitimate cause of the Palestinians and they have a right and a duty to support it. On the other hand, Israel has an equal right to say that if Iran chooses to play that role, then Israel's right of self-defense extends to challenging the Iranian positions in the region. As far as the Americans are concerned, they say that Israel is a state. It has worked with many of its Arab neighbors, its partners. It is working in peace, and they had plans for developing economically and otherwise other arrangements in the region. And since it was attacked, it has a right to defend itself. Now, this has gone on for a year. These arguments haven't ended. Meanwhile, the conflict has become even more and more violent with each passing day. And we are today on the brink of a situation which is quite dangerous.
You look at the way Israel is carrying out its military operations now. They are fighting a two-front war. But especially in Gaza, the humanitarian situation is it's terrible because for 42,000 people were killed over the last 1 year, and after this kind of violence, where do you think West Asia is going to be? Is Israel meeting its objectives? Is this going to help Israel achieve long-term security, or this is going to leave a moral stain on Israel?
We'll start with basically what is their strategy. Their immediate strategy was to finish the situation that was created for them on October 7th last year, which was the terrorist incursion, attack, and destruction of a lot of their positions, killing a lot of their people, 1,200 people dead, 250 hostages, and so on. So they had to fight back. They had to finish that particular situation. Now they see that any kind of solution must lock in what they call deterrence, that Hamas must never be in a position to or feel bold enough to try this again. That's how it started. Very soon it became a war to finish Hamas, to create a new reality in the Gaza region, and to crush Hamas, to make it unable to carry out any kind of resistance of this nature. Today, it would seem that they have gone beyond these strategies to think in terms of dividing Gaza into two and keeping a kind of permanent security presence over there. Now, obviously, this has caused immense destruction, and certainly it has caused anguish, anger, and justifiable outrage in the rest of the world. Israelis still feel that the kind of attacks they face, the worst since the creation of their state, justifies their doing what they did. But I think much of the world would not agree. They may be having some ardent supporters, but most would agree with your conclusion that an objective analysis of the final outcome will show this as, if not a stain, but certainly a serious setback to their reputation and their position in this entire conflict.
Gaza is not the only place where Israel is fighting. How do you look at the other conflict, especially in Lebanon? Because they launched their fourth invasion in history on October 1st, and it's been going on for now almost a month. So, how do you look at the Lebanon war?
See, the Lebanon war is a little different. The Hezbollah, which is the dominant force in South Lebanon, maintains a very, very large arsenal of weapons and an army ready to fight, in effect. They chose on this particular occasion to revive their long conflict with Israel in support of Hamas and use their very strong position of their arsenal of missiles, rockets, drones, etc., to threaten northern Israel, force, in fact, large population in northern Israel to flee for safety. And thereafter, the Israelis claim they maintain a force ready with the theoretical aim of liberating Galilee, which is northern Israel. Now, whether that's actually their aim or not, they were certainly supporting Hamas and putting very strong pressure on Israel. So, Israel, which, as you correctly said, has invaded Lebanon in the past, first against Palestinian forces which were there and then against Hezbollah, chose to carry out a war against Lebanon, against Hezbollah, which initially was an aerial war and a war of intelligence devices, rockets, and so on. And now the ground invasion. The ground invasion has gone somewhat more slowly than anticipated. It is not the kind of offensive they carried out, say, in 1982 or 96, 97. But it is a very grim situation because while this incursion or many incursions have gone on, there has been a relentless air war which has caused huge destruction in not just southern Lebanon, but all the way into Beirut city, and even one or two attacks in the north of Lebanon. But it is different from the war against Hamas to that extent.
But do you think this Israeli approach of decapitating the Hezbollah leadership at first and then carrying out this massive airstrike and then launching a ground operation inside Lebanon, is this working or is this too early to reach conclusions? Because what I can see, at least if you look at Israeli papers, Hezbollah keeps firing rockets and 100 rockets, 150 rockets. Even yesterday, Israel lost 5 soldiers in combat in South Lebanon. So Hezbollah, despite the setbacks, back-to-back setbacks it suffered, it seems to be remaining as a fighting force.
I agree with you. Hezbollah is a formidable fighting force, and it is best equipped for resistance against the kind of attack which Israel wants to carry out now, which is a ground incursion. It has demonstrated repeatedly that its capacity for both positional war and guerrilla war in the southern Lebanon region, that is Litani River and south, is really quite unmatched. It is, of course, equipped with a huge arsenal of missiles, rockets, and now drones, with which it is able to carry out attacks. So there are two things which have happened. One is the decapitation of its leadership, and it has been forced to rely on older systems of communication because the Israelis seem to have penetrated. So, from looking at the battlefield, everything which is not actually in that strip close to the border with Israel, south of the Litani River, the Israelis have been able to attack with considerable success. They have killed a large number of their top commanders. They have been able to cut off some of their resupply efforts. But on the ground in southern Lebanon and in the control centers of some of the rockets and drones, they have still not been able to achieve success. So that a ground attack for Israel is going to be a difficult operation. They know it themselves, and they will have to move rather more cautiously than they have in Gaza. And on the drones and the rockets, the Israelis seemed confident that they would be able to deal with them and gradually, through a war of attrition and destruction, drastically reduce Hezbollah's capacity. But some of the drone attacks have shown great sophistication. The drones have gone out over the sea and come back into Israel from there. The one which killed 4 soldiers near Haifa actually dipped below the radar for a point and still seemed to be under control. So there are problems the Israelis know they are going to face. Their technological ability to tackle such kind of threats is quite formidable. So one doesn't know whether they will be able to overcome this, but they will have to move with the certainty that they will face casualties, and it will not be the kind of operation they have been able to carry out in Gaza.
Okay, so let's pivot to India. So India's position with regard to this crisis, is there in the discussion in pretty much in Indian media. And India historically has taken a very vocal position in favor of the Palestinian cause. And now, as far as what I understand is that India condemned the October 7 terror attack, but at the same time, India declared its support for the two-state solution. So if you look at the voting record at the UN, India voted in favor of at least 4 resolutions that were more or less critical of Israel's occupation and in favor of the Palestinians. But we don't condemn the Israeli attack, Israel's ongoing military operations, but we express solidarity with the humanitarian situation. So again, understand a balancing act. But how do you look at the effectiveness of India's position vis-a-vis this crisis in the region?
Well, the very fact that you call it a balancing act would lead people in Delhi to conclude that it's fairly effective, that it's seen as a balancing act, which has traditionally been India's position. India has never been completely on one side or the other. In the current situation, I think India also feels that it is necessary to underline at one level its horror about terrorism. I read recently that even when you talk of Sinwar, he was released in a exchange when the Israelis had to recover some of their prisoners of war. So, and he has then successfully taken on the leadership of Hamas till he was killed recently. This has kind of revived memories of the kind of situation we were drawn into when forced to hand over people, terrorists whom we had captured and so on, because of hostage situations, hijacking, and so on. So there is a revulsion at acts of terrorism, which is very real and it hits home. Now, can you be effective? Can you do something to help alleviate the situation, ameliorate suffering by taking a very strong position, which is not a balancing act, as you said? That is questionable. The other final point I would add in this is without this kind of a balancing act, if at all a position arises for you to play some role in, if not resolution of the conflict, at least lowering its tempo and bringing about some kind of uh, temporary peace or temporary ceasefire, you have to be by and large uh, seen, at least in the main among the main parties, as not partisan. And today, without an Israeli acceptance, no outside power is in a position to play any kind of mediating role. I understand that the Chinese initially took a very strong line. They were, in fact, very vocal in support of the Arab position, the Palestinian position. But of late, their statements have been more guarded. They, in fact, talked about the immense humanitarian disaster in Gaza and the large number of civilian casualties without identifying any party responsible for it. So I think, while not comparing our position to the Chinese, I think that broadly explains what you call the balancing act.
Do you think India should or India can play a larger role in bringing the war to an end?
Well, I do not think we can at this point, but that is less to do with our inability than the unwillingness of any of the main parties presently to accept mediation. At the moment, most of the parties involved in the current conflict are engaged in a strategy of seeing how far they can go before they resort to any kind of diplomatic um, mediation or diplomatic steps to lower the temperature of the conflict or bring it to a close.
In your opening remarks, you also referred to the occupation of the Palestinian territories. And India's External Affairs Minister himself had said earlier this year that at the end of the day, the fact of the matter remains that the Palestinians are denied of their statehood. So what is the future of the Palestinian cause or the Palestinian question, their quest for statehood?
It's very hard to say what the future is, but I think one conclusion we can arrive at quite safely is that without some resolution of the Palestinian desire for their own uh, independent existence in this region, it is not going to be possible to arrive at what you call a final permanent settlement. This has traditionally been seen as the two-state solution. I personally, having examined this, think there is no other possibility. The only other possibilities, as we have discussed on an earlier occasion, is a one-state solution which is not acceptable to anybody. A era of permanent occupation, apartheid-like existence, not sustainable, sure to blow up sometime or the other. So I think long-term, a two-state solution is the only way out. Right now, it does not seem to be possible because of the very strong positions taken by all sides. But if, and one doesn't know what international circumstances and domestic circumstances would be needed in Israel, among the Palestinian people, their neighbors, neighboring states, Iran, and so on. But if there is a situation in which a temporary solution with autonomy leading to full independence for the Palestinians were possible, I think that is the only way we can proceed. If there is a catastrophic situation in which one side or the other faces utter military defeat, that will still only provide a temporary respite from the search for a final permanent settlement of this issue.
But if Netanyahu's plan is to divide Gaza into north and south and reoccupy parts of northern Gaza, which means the current situation is going to get a lot more complicated, isn't it?
It is, yes. And which is why I think it may not be sustainable. You see, even in Gaza, you mentioned about the fighting continuing in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon. Yeah. Even in Gaza, with all this destruction, even after the killing of Sinwar, they lost a colonel, I think 3 days ago, a senior officer. So the ability of Hamas guerrilla groups, small, perhaps uncoordinated, to survive is continuing because Israel is not in a position to permanently occupy everything where their military goes in, creates a destruction, destroys a Hamas stronghold. They don't stay there. They have to come back. They need to re-equip, rearm, etc. And then they find a new situation developing. It is becoming less and less. So some of them feel that over a period of time, they will crush Hamas so decisively that they will not be able to raise their head. But what are they going to do? I mean, there are 2 million people there. Yeah. They can't be forced out, at least in the normal world in which we live. That is not a possibility. So Israel will have to face the consequences of whatever decision it takes. It can divide Gaza into two. It can make security zones. It can even, as some of them more extreme people say, we should send back settlers, etc. But they will face this situation that it is an unsustainable administrative problem for them. How will they deal with that when their economy is already under pressure? It's going to be a permanent drain on them. They will need a lot of massive outside support. I don't think that is forthcoming.
Even after a year of war, Israel hasn't crushed Hamas yet, and Israel will have to face the consequences of the decisions they make. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining Realpolitik.
Thank you.